Hello again and welcome to The Luxury Choice, a B2B technical sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm a senior sales trainer of George James, as well as the host and producer of this podcast. This is another of our mid-month guest interview shows where I chat to a subject matter expert we think you, the listener, will find of interest and value. Today my guest is Sam Issacs. Sam is an award-winning marketer and developer with a passion of developing exceptional customer-focused experiences. Sam works for Issacs, a company that specialises in the development, manufacture and distribution of medical devices for the diagnosis and monitoring of asthma. Their flagship product, Issacs Vero, is a non-invasive medical device that measures fractional exhaled nitrous oxide levels in patients with asthma. Sam is also a fellow podcaster and a former managing director of Radio Bista. Hi Sam, and welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, Steve.
I was a chemist once, but somehow managed to mangle nitrous oxide there. I don't know how I got that wrong, but still, or nitric oxide, should I say. But still, forgive me on that one. So, great to have you here, sir. Thanks so much for agreeing to do the pod. So, where are you sitting today? Where are you based?
I'm in Oxford.
Oh, you're just down the road then?
Yeah, not too far, yeah.
Down my favourite road, the A34, yeah.
I think it's everyone's favourite road, isn't it?
Not. For our non-UK listeners, it's one of the world's worst roads. But
yes.
Yeah. So we were just chatting a little bit before we started, and there's a lot of ways we could take the chat today. But first of all, let's just get a bit of a background to yourself. So just for the benefit of the listener, just going to say a few words about yourself, your background and what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Samuel Issacs. I'm the head of marketing at a medical devices company called Issacs. And I also usually have a beard for everyone who's watching this. It's just every sort of 1.5 years, I need to shave it all off in order for it to grow back in a nice way. So You've just caught me with this interview without the beard. So if anyone on LinkedIn sees this, normally I have a beard. I'm not a catfish, if that makes sense.
Well, you look very hirsute, if that's the right word. Yeah. I tried to grow one on holiday a few weeks ago, but I never get past the itchy stage. I give up at that stage.
But technically, so in the day-to-day, work for Issacs, and I run their marketing across the globe. And just building on what you're saying, Issacs is a non-invasive medical device that helps doctors and hospital consultants diagnose and manage asthma. So, asthma is a massive problem globally, and it's great to be able to work for a company that makes a difference with the diagnosis and management of that, just making it easier for doctors to use, if that makes sense. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the day job, and I manage a team of 3 people globally, with a few other people in the different regions that I work with, and we're quite a small team, but we've delivered quite a lot in terms of digital marketing and making sure that we get Issacs out there and heard and all that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to talk about some of those things today.
I'm looking forward to finding out more, Sam, certainly. And is it a UK company or is it?
Yeah, it's a UK company.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it is.
So Oxford's the head office, yeah?
Oxford's the head office, yeah. It's kind of mergers and acquisitions like most companies. We did actually start 25 years ago in Uppsala in Sweden.
Oh, right.
But now they were bought by a UK company, and here we are today. So it's great. It's lovely when you work for a company that's got all that heritage,
absolutely,
as well, which is good. And to survive 25 years is quite a good thing to celebrate, right?
Yeah, I've been to Uppsala actually. Back when I used to work for GE Healthcare Life Sciences, it's now Cytiva, but they have a big manufacturing facility there.
Yeah. The nice thing about Uppsala is it's very similar to Oxford in a way. It's got a university, and the architecture is quite similar. It's almost the same.
Just doesn't have the A34. No.
Yeah.
So I think we could spend a lot of time talking about the things that you've done outside of your role. And we mentioned the radio station, which I could spend all day talking to you about that because I do a little radio show as well. But for the benefit of our listeners, let's sort of focus down on the digital marketing side of things. And I think one of the things you were saying to me when we were chatting about the show is how the business has really gone through a significant turnaround in recent times, and a lot of that you feel is down to the stuff that you and your team have done. So, how's that come about? What is it that actually drove that business turnaround from your perspective, and how did the marketing team impact that directly?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in terms of the journey that we've been on as a company, we've kind of gone from trying to do multiple different things to really focusing in on one product and making sure that we do that right, if that makes sense. So it's been a really interesting journey from, the day that I joined the company to today.
Okay.
And like you mentioned, we've had a fantastic turnaround in terms of where it is that we've, where we were before to where we are today, if that makes sense. But really, the best thing about Niox and what we've done is the company itself has always been a big believer in internal marketing. So typically, what you find, if you find a small medical devices company, specifically medical devices, typically they'll have a massive marketing budget that they use to predominantly spend with agencies. So you'll find, 10 or so different agencies doing different things for this company. Problem is agencies specifically, they've got lots of clients, right? So, I'm not saying agencies are bad, but they're not as focused on your product, or they're not as passionate about your product as you may be, if that makes sense. So one of the things that Niox did, and I was part of that process, is they looked for marketeers in the local area and also wider that would be able to come in and basically replace that sort of dependency on agencies, if that makes sense. So
it's kind of bringing it in-house rather than outsourcing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we were able to create a really fantastic in-house team that, after a little bit of training, a little bit of understanding the product, was able to go and really, save money on agencies, so we don't have to spend the same fees on agencies. But the other thing that it does is that then that money you were spending on agencies, you can redirect that into actually spending it on ads, or actually spending it on ways to get out there and reach people. So that was one of the sort of main ways that we've been able to assist the business in moving forward, is being able to do that. But then the other thing, like I said, is that all of us are so passionate about what we do, about the products. I'm sure when you've had other guests on and when you guys talk yourselves, passion and being passionate about the products is so important from a sales perspective. And
absolutely,
I would actually argue it's more important for your internal marketing team or your marketeers to have that passion as well, because they basically come up with the campaigns and the messages that help salespeople go out there and sell. So it's really important to have that. So that's probably the cultural thing that we've done. But then we've kind of been the innovator and the trailblazer in our sort of field, if that makes sense. So we're always thinking outside the box, thinking, well, what can we offer that's slightly different to other people in this space, right? So on our website, for example, we've got an interpreting pheno calculator, and pheno's the gas that is produced. So fractional oxide nitric oxide is the gas that's produced when someone uses one of our machines. And effectively, they can type in their score and it will tell them what the result means. So it just makes the doctor's life really easy, if that makes sense. And that's also a great way to generate leads. So there's also really cool I call it magical bits like that, that enable businesses and enable customers to come onto your website, for example. It's all on brand, but they just get that little bit extra that they may not get from somebody else.
Yeah, fascinating. So I think there's a lot of key messages there, bringing it in-house, saving the agency fees, doing the stuff yourself, but obviously having the competence and the skill set to do it in-house. But then I think particularly in the kind of people who listen to the show, the industries they work in, scientific equipment, lab equipment, medical devices, it's one of the common themes we hear is it's really hard to get your message through to the customer because it's a niche market. It's not a B2B or a C2C type marketing kind of environment. So how do you get the message across? And I think what you're saying there is be innovative, really. Yeah. Think of something that's different. Yeah. Yeah,
I'd say so. I mean, that 3-letter acronym always comes out, doesn't it? SEO, right? Search engine optimization. Okay, sure. But effectively, the way it works is and someone taught me this at the beginning of my short. I've only been at Niox for 5 years. So I've only been in medical devices for 5 years. It's the first company I've worked in. But someone taught me this right at the beginning, which is actually, doctors are people. So there's this almost complicated thought process that goes into, how do we market this to a doctor? Well, how would you market it to a human being? How would you market it to yourself, right? So I think sometimes, I don't mean to come across in a negative way, but sometimes people overcomplicate marketing for sort of doctors or in the medical field. It's really can come down to almost like Thinking Fast or Slow, that book by Daniel Kleinman. The sort of rational side of your brain and the irrational side of your brain, the sort of ways that you respond to advertising when it's nothing to do with your job, you also respond to the same sort of ads when it's to do with your job, because that's just how advertising works, right? So I think sometimes we overcomplicate advertising to healthcare professionals as a whole, if that makes sense. And
completely.
Yeah.
as you say, we're human beings, and one of the things we often say in our sales training is, people make decisions for emotional reasons and then justify them with business reasons. I know I do that all the time when I bought another gadget off Amazon and I'm trying to explain to my wife why we need it. You make those sort of personal decisions. I guess it's the same in marketing. I'm not a marketeer, but in terms of making those decisions to either click on that link or explore that blog or whatever, you've got to get through to the person as a person as opposed to necessarily what their job is. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, people respond to that. You'll actually be shocked at how, especially when, one of the things when we started to market in this way, almost my philosophy as head of marketing at Issacs has always been, well, let's market to people as if they're people, not as if they're doctors, right?
Yeah.
Because typically, and again, no disrespect to the medical community, but typically sometimes, healthcare professionals are very busy. And, just to get the salesperson out of the way, they might say, oh, I'd like to see all of the data. Could you go and produce, say, 50-page report of all the data so that you can come back and show me it? Well, what they really mean is, can you put together a 50-page report so I can politely ignore it because it's so long, because it's 50 pages?
And you're probably not going to do it anyway because it's a load of work and you don't want to do it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So there's also that side of it as well, which is, sometimes going in. I mean, the amazing thing about science as a whole when it comes to medical devices is majority of the companies that make medical device products or, pharmaceuticals, they actually are really passionate about the end goal that will have to patients, right? And really, that's where you should focus your marketing, because that's almost emotional, right? It's like we talked about just a few moments ago. It's the emotional decision. It's, let's get our passionate people out, or let's educate our internal teams to really focus on and think about, well, how do we do this as passionate as we talk about it behind closed doors? Because typically when you're in a medical device company, you're having a discussion about, this is amazing how this benefits asthma patients, right? In our case, for example. So how do we get that message, that passion that we have internally, how do we get that out to our customers and potential customers? Because that's one of the ways you can pierce through and you can have those really cool and engaging conversations. And the other thing is that doctors and healthcare professionals, they actually love that. They love having those conversations.
I'm sure.
Because they're passionate about it as well.
Well, I think passion is a key word, and I know it's a word that we all tend to use a little bit sort of glibly, really, particularly on our LinkedIn profiles. But I'm a great believer in that if you don't have the enthusiasm and the drive and yes, and let's use the word passion for what it is you do, then why are you doing it, really? And it will come across in everything that you do in terms of the way you present yourself, the way you communicate, and the way you get across to your customer, really. I'd like to just turn back a little bit to some of the things we were talking about a minute ago in terms of the decisions you made to do something different in your marketing, in the way you marketed it externally. But how did you market that internally? So thinking about how you sell, I don't know if you have a sales force or you sell directly or what, but how did you take those messages internally? Because whenever you're selling, there's always an external selling and an internal sell. How did you do that?
It's a really good question. I mean, so, for Issacs' perspective, we do the same things as most companies. We have an internal newsletter that goes out to all of our employees. And we also, whenever we come up with a new marketing campaign, we make sure that we brief that internally as well. And actually, you'll be surprised. Sometimes we spend just the same amount of time as we do coming up with the external messaging, coming up with the internal messaging, because we understand that internal marketing is also really important. Typically, a lot of salespeople will turn around to their marketing department and say, this is really important. I really need this right now. And you'll go and develop it and then they'll never use it.
Right? I mean, it's very familiar.
It happens all the time, right?
I've probably had those conversations myself with marketing people, actually, in years gone by.
So it's like, so one of the things that you have to do internally as well as a marketeer, or even as a salesperson, is really think about the bigger picture, right? Okay, so sometimes there are some quick wins that sometimes salespeople come to you and say, oh, I say this to the customer, and I'd love for us to have some sort of A4 document that says that to the customer, if that makes sense. But then there are other considerations you have to take, like, well, what if you leave that and a competitor finds it, for example, or, if there's something else in there that could be a better message. So the reason why internal marketing is so important, and also transparency for marketeers out there that may be listening to this, is sometimes what you want to do internally is communicate why you've come up with the decision you've come up with, right? So sometimes going back to that emotional feedback that we talked about earlier, or that emotional sort of response that people tend to go with first. Well, typically, what happens is you get an emotional response to marketing materials as well. You go, oh, this isn't going to work. This isn't what I asked for, right?
Yeah.
But if you're transparent internally around, well, actually, we did some data, we did some research, and actually we feel like this will be the best message for the customer, then as long as you're transparent, you actually get a better success rate. And you get salespeople that end up using the marketing messages that you've come up with. So which always works. And you know what, Steve, there's nothing better in my career than when a salesperson comes up to me and says, do you know what, we said what you recommended and it works. Fantastic. It's just brilliant. It's brilliant when you hear that, you know. It is good. So
and actually sales and marketing can work together rather than in opposition sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely. So you have to be based on it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. One of the things we were chatting about before we started, and is kind of like my thing within the George James team, is LinkedIn, and we obviously talked about this particular podcast on LinkedIn, really. So how important has LinkedIn been in terms of your marketing activities? And what is it you've done, if so, that worked for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, first of all, it's all about research. So one of the first things I did on a field visit when I joined the company at Issacs is I went to see a couple of our doctors, and I actually asked them, what platforms do you use to get news, to get understanding, to get information? And surprisingly, a lot of doctors came back and said, oh, we use LinkedIn to communicate, if that makes sense. So the first thing we did was we set up a LinkedIn presence to make sure that, you know, we can put stuff on LinkedIn, you know, create posts, et cetera, to actually advertise that. But then the other thing is we actually then started to use LinkedIn paid ads to people that work in the healthcare industry. And that's been very successful for us across the board, if that makes sense. It's been a great way to raise the awareness of what it is that we're talking about as well. And the other thing is it's actually compliant with all the regulations for medical devices, because I'm sure you'll understand, Steve, for certain medical device and pharmaceutical products, you have to have there's certain regulations that you have to provide.
All that kind of stuff, yeah.
But actually, you know, running ads on LinkedIn, because you're able to really prove, you know, that it's going to the correct target audience, you are actually allowed to do that.
That's interesting.
Sometimes, again, going back to it, some companies, you know, medical device companies, they don't feel like they can do that. And actually, if you look at, I mean, obviously different products have different regulations, but for our product, we're able to do that, and we found success with that. So
just so I understand that point properly, sorry to interrupt, Sam. Sorry to understand that point properly. So what you're saying is, because of the market you work in and the products you make, you couldn't do, you wouldn't, of course, but like a mass market advertising in a newspaper,
correct,
say, because you would have to be able to prove or validate the claims that you make. But because you're working in a business-to-business networking environment like LinkedIn, that takes care of some of the, or if not a lot of the for want of a better phrase, the box ticking to cover the compliance and the regulations you need to fit there.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely correct. So there's two things you touched on there. I mean, the first one is, you know, the biggest regulation for the UK and the EU is you can't advertise pharmaceutical or medical device products to patients.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have to be able to prove that if you're doing some sort of advertising, so like we couldn't do a Facebook campaign because we can't prove it, you know, but we could do a LinkedIn campaign because we can prove that, you know, in the criteria it says job title meets X, industry meets X, if that makes sense.
Yes,
so it's definitely going to the people who'd like it to go to. So that's kind of what I'm referring to is that more than anything else. You have to be very careful, obviously, and each product has its own. So there's certain pharmaceutical products probably wouldn't get away with that, but each product, you know, because we're a medical device company, we can. So, and typically, if you're a medical device company that's listening to this right now and going, "Oh, I want to try that," speak to your regs people before you try it. No, that's what I'll say. I'm just going to cover myself there and say, speak to your regulatory people before you try it.
We're smiling because compliance is ultra important. So
sure.
Absolutely. I used to live in the States. My wife and I lived in the States going back 23 years ago now, and I remember when we first moved there, we couldn't get over the fact that companies were advertising pharmaceuticals on the TV and medical devices all the time, and it just seemed so strange. And you know, as a European, for that to happen, so I totally understand the point there, really. So LinkedIn has been really important because, as you say, doctors are now using it. I guess they've, like lots of people, they've come off things like Twitter and places, because Twitter seems to be where people go for a fight now rather than to have a meaningful discussion. So it actually is a key place where your target customers hang out, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the marketing side of it. Is obviously reaching out to our target customers on LinkedIn through paid ads and also through our profiles with just organic posts. And the other side of it is there's almost a social selling element to it. I kind of hate that term, social selling. It kind of doesn't feel right. But there's that sort of social promotion side of it as well, where your account managers and your sales members of the team can share the organic posts onto their timeline. Right. And then they know as well that they're being compliant because all of the posts on the organic timeline have been checked, they've all been referenced, so they know that they can share that effectively with their network. And then the other thing that we've done is we've really promoted to our sales teams that actually LinkedIn is a fantastic sales tool. Now, we don't advocate that you reach out to people on LinkedIn because typically it's a bit of a time waste. It takes a long time, the returns are very low, but if you speak to a physician or a nurse or somebody at a conference or somewhere else, or you meet them at their hospital, for example, adding them on LinkedIn afterwards can actually lead to some really, really great results. So
completely.
So we don't tend to say to our sales team, "Oh, you should go and find new business on LinkedIn," because as we all know, we all get those thousands of messages every day. But, in the real world, when you're out there meeting people, it's a great way to enhance that relationship. And then also, because you're sharing those organic posts, spread the message of our products and services wider as they become a connection with the account managers, for example.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more with the importance of sharing meaningful content on your personal LinkedIn page as well as the company LinkedIn page. We do encourage, in the training that we do encourage people to reach out to people on LinkedIn, but in a very sort of selective way. And I do agree with you that there's a lot of automation and mass marketing seems to be happening now on LinkedIn, which turns me off completely, and I'm sure it does most other people. Did you give the sales team any kind of training or any kind of guidance around their own personal profiles on LinkedIn?
Yeah, we generated a policy for it.
All right.
And also provided some training. So the sort of do's and don'ts with LinkedIn. And your own sort of profile, et cetera, and all that kind of stuff. So it's typically good to do that, especially, again, in regulated industries like ours. You just want to make sure everyone understands what you can and cannot do from that side of things as well. Because, again, going back to it, you can't advertise to patients. So, if you don't think your content is going to be going out there to somebody else, for example, or it gets lost and it goes to someone that's completely unrelated to our job titles or to the people that work in our industry, well then that could cause some heated water. So obviously again, just going back to talking about what we can and can't do from that side of things. So yeah, we've done some training, done some social policies on it as well, just to make sure that all employees understand what you can and can't do when it comes to LinkedIn in our context. And that's been really helpful. It's been really helpful. Yeah.
Good. I mean, it is their page, it's not the company's page, but clearly there are things that you need them to understand as to what is good policy and what isn't a good thing to do on LinkedIn page. I always encourage people that I train to experiment within the constraints that you're given, really. I put a lot of sort of, not jokey things, but, I even did an April Fool on there once, and it was probably one of the best performances, performing posts I ever did. But then that's because I'm selling me. I am the product, if you like, as opposed to you guys with a physical product, really. Is there anything else that you've done then besides LinkedIn? Any other areas that you've had success with generating awareness and campaigns?
Well, I think the main thing is, and I'll touch on an example here, but there's something that I like to call digital magic. I think I touched on it slightly earlier, but there are certain technology companies that are very good at this. Everyone uses Apple as an example, right? But there's almost that magic feel to specific pieces of marketing or sales, right? Which is always really good. I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I'll tell you a story about something that we did at Issacs, which I always love to tell, which is always good. So, this is back in 2020, obviously lockdown, all that kind of stuff. But we'd been working on this before the lockdown anyway, but it just accelerated when we were all working from home during that period. So effectively, we had a customer in the UK, but part of the NHS, that was looking to put together a diagnostic bus. So, basically loads of different medical products, loads of different devices on a bus, which they'll drive around the country, and then they'll do sort of diagnostic hubs, which is really cool. They said to us, we'd like to see how your product fits onto our bus. And what we'd actually done is we developed an augmented reality experience. So they could use their iPhone, and literally with the camera of their iPhone, they could see because it scans the room and scans the understanding, it gives it the perfect size. They could perfectly see how the device would look in their setting through the camera of the phone, which was really good. So that then led to a conversion. So they went ahead with the sales as a result of that. So digital magic. So what do I mean by that? Well, that's quite a magical experience for a customer, right? They can go on there, they can use augmented reality, they can look through their phone and see what the device would look like on their desk, right, or on their product shelf on the bus, if that makes sense. And that's just almost a bit magical. So it makes the customer do two things. One, it solves the problem. They can see how big it is in their space. Yeah. The second thing is it's such a nice technological experience that they go, that's really cool, that's the future. And, the more of those experiences you create for your customers, the more sticky they become to your brand, right? So the more they go, oh, this is really magical, it's really smooth, it's really easy to understand. So, it kind of goes a bit further than that. It goes to the whole, is it easy to order from you? Is it easy? There's the product always delivered when you say the product's going to be delivered, but there's all this stuff that you can just kind of tick all the boxes and then go, that's really magical. And that just makes them really brand ambassadors for you, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And, I think there's a great takeaway there. And it's not just about the product and what you say, it's what you do. It's like how you make them feel. It's a quote from Maya Angelou. People will always remember, well, forget what you say, forget what you did, but always remember how you made them feel. And the fact that they'll probably thought, oh, that was cool, I really enjoyed that. They'll remember that going down the road 2 or 3 years' time when they need one of your kind of products. They'll think, oh, who does that? Oh, I remember that company, that cool company on the bus. I've seen companies do that also with laboratory equipment. So, using VR goggles and things, literally having like a virtual lab and working with, sort of the hands and doing things in the lab, albeit virtually, which again, it's just anything differentiates you, I guess, really. And that people just remember. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing is as well is there's certain people that end up working for a company or they end up working for a product that they actually think, do you know what, this product isn't very good. Right? We've all done it. We've all worked for a company. We've gone. Yes.
I won't say which one.
No, exactly. I won't name names either. But we've all done it where we've worked for a company and we've gone, the product isn't really great. Well, the other thing to remember is that it's easy to sell and it's easy to market if your product is fantastic, right? It's just easy. So my other piece of advice for salespeople and for marketing people would be, look, if you happen to be in that situation where you work for a product where you might think, oh, we could improve that a little bit, or it doesn't feel that right, have the conversation internally, because there's a lot of people out there, Steve, that don't feel like they can share the feedback from their own perspective. And, you might as well. What have you got to lose? It's all in the best interest of the company as well. So yeah.
I guess if you've got the right kind of culture, we did an episode a while back about company culture, but if you've got the right kind of company where it's okay to say,
sure,
this isn't very good, this doesn't work very well. Unfortunately, I think in some organisations that wouldn't be acceptable because it's the kind of culture, sadly, that they have really. But hopefully those companies are getting increasingly fewer and farther away. If there was one, to anybody listening to this now, thinking, well, we need to up our game in terms of our digital marketing or our digital activity, if there's one thing that you would say to them to go and check right now, what would that be?
Well, I think for everybody, and I'd always say this to everybody, it's always to do with your website, right? It's the shop window into your business. Now, for every salesperson and marketeer out there, you are too close to the product. Okay, so you can't assess your own website. You should never assess your own website because what happens is you're too close to it. So sometimes you understand things or terminology or whatever, it's on your website, but the customer doesn't know what you're talking about because it's something that you understand.
Those 3-letter acronyms, everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, there's that, or, sometimes because you're working on it and you're selling it and you're putting it together, it's almost implied in certain ways that the product does X or does Y, if that makes sense, but actually the customer may not understand that, right? So my piece of advice to anybody listening now and wants to up their game would be, go and see one of your customers if you've got one, or if you haven't got one, go to an event or go and find somebody that is in your target demographic that would be open to giving you some feedback, and literally sit them in front of your website or sit them in front of your digital platform and go, can you just give me some feedback on this? Can you just run through it? Does this give you the message? What's the message you get from it, et cetera, to really understand how they're thinking, because we're too close to it. I'm guilty of this myself. There are times where somebody on my team turns around and says to me, yeah, but the customer doesn't understand that. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's because we're too close to it. So that's just for me, I think it's the most important thing to give to your listeners is get somebody that's in your target demographic of who you're targeting to actually sit down and go, oh, what's this? What's X? What's Y? Ask
how do I find this? Where do I go to get this? Yeah,
absolutely.
Super point, really. Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of that. We're going through some website changes ourselves, and I think we've gone through that process of getting third-party input. But I'll leave that to our marketing team to clarify on that. Really, Sam, it's been great chatting with you today, and we could talk for hours, as I say, if we had the chance. Where's the best place for the listener to find out more about you and what it is your company does?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously to find out more about Niox, it's niox.com, which is niox.com. And then to find out more about me, just search me on LinkedIn, Samuel Issacs on LinkedIn, and you'll find me on there. I've got a monthly newsletter myself, so please subscribe to it.
What's it called? I've just signed up for it, but for the listener, what's it called?
Do you know what? I forgot. Oh, the Marketing Mix. That's
the Marketing Mix, yeah.
Yeah, the Marketing Mix, yeah. But for some reason, I was in my head, I was like, I've forgotten the name of it.
we all have moments like that, believe me, especially when you get to my age. Sam, it's been great having you on the podcast. Thanks for being here today. Really appreciate you taking your time.
No worries. Thank you, Steve.
So if you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast app and tell your friends and colleagues all about us, please. Also, we would love you to leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It does help us in lots of mysterious ways. And if you would like to contact the show, ask a question, or even disagree with us, dare I say, you can email the team at podcast@georgejames, and there's a hyphen, georgejames-training.com. You can also actually directly message us now on the podcast app as well. So it sends a text message that will find its way through to me eventually at some stage. I'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with my colleagues Jonathan and Prue. Until then, happy selling, and I'll talk to you soon.